Every single workplace, whether it's a massive factory or a tiny startup, runs on a set of rules. And nope, I'm not just talking about the company handbook. There's a much bigger, much more official rulebook out there, a legal framework that really defines the whole relationship between you and your employer. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on it. So let me ask you, what are the rules where you work? And who do you think actually writes them? The answer, as you might guess, isn't just your manager. It's actually this huge, complex web of laws and regulations, all designed to make sure things are fair for everyone. So let's get into what that official rulebook is all about. The key competency we're digging into today is what it really means to know labor laws. It's about getting a handle on that official rulebook, the actual regulations that spell out worker rights, what employers are obligated to do, and basically the entire power dynamic of our working lives. Okay, I get it. A legal rulebook sounds, well, pretty intimidating, right? Super dense, but the good news is we can break it all down into a few key areas. I like to think of them as the foundational pillars that hold up the whole structure of our rights and our responsibilities at work. So here they are, the 6 big pillars of modern labor law. We're going to start with the basics, core legislation, then get into health and safety, equality, and industrial relations. After that, we'll look at how the law is trying to keep up with things like the gig economy, and we'll finish up with compliance. Let's break them down one by one. All right, first up, core legislation. This is the absolute foundation, the bedrock, right? It covers the basics we all kind of expect. Things like getting paid a fair minimum wage, having reasonable limits on how many hours you work, and of course, your right to take time off. Next, we've got health and safety. And the idea here is super simple, but so important. Your job shouldn't hurt you. This covers everything from the really obvious stuff like physical hazards in a factory to making sure there are proper facilities like access to first aid for everybody. And then we have Pillar 3, equality. And honestly, this one is a game changer. It's about making sure fairness isn't just a suggestion, it's the law. This makes it illegal to discriminate based on things like gender or religion. And it's what puts the principle of equal pay for equal work into legal writing. Then there's industrial relations. This pillar is all about the power of the group, It sets out the rules for things like trade unions, the whole process of collective bargaining for better pay or conditions, and the official ways to sort out disputes when employees and management just aren't on the same page. Okay, the way we work is changing like crazy, right? Well, that's where Pillar 5 comes in. This covers all the evolving rules for contract workers and, maybe most importantly right now, the brand new legal territory of the gig economy and all that platform-based work. And finally, we have compliance. This is the practical how-to side of the rulebook. It's all about how companies actually follow through on their responsibilities. Things like filing the right paperwork on time, being ready for inspections, and knowing what happens if they don't follow the rules. Okay, so we've got the theory down, right? The 6 pillars. But what does that actually look like in the real world? Let's make this concrete by looking at how these ideas get turned into actual laws, and we'll use some key examples from the Indian legal system to do it. So check this out. These are some of the foundational laws. You can literally see the pillars we just talked about coming to life here. The Factories Act, that's a perfect real-world example of the health and safety pillar. And the Minimum Wages Act is a classic piece of core legislation that creates a legal floor for what you can be paid. And it's not just about your daily work. The law also thinks about your future, creating this financial safety net for you. We're talking about acts that cover things like provident funds, which are kind of like retirement savings, or gratuity, which is a special payment you get for sticking with a company long term. They're all designed to provide security. All right, now let's double-click on that really critical pillar of equality, because it's one thing to have a principle, but how does the law actually turn the idea of fairness into something that a company has to do, not just something that's nice to do? Just look at how this works. The Maternity Benefit Act gives crucial support to working moms. The Equal Remuneration Act makes equal pay for equal work a legal demand, not just a slogan. And the Act on Sexual Harassment forces companies to have preventative measures and official complaint systems. The big takeaway here? These aren't just nice-to-haves. They are rights you can enforce. Okay, so we've seen the laws, we've seen the pillars. The big question is, so what? Why does knowing all this stuff actually matter? Well, the impact is huge, for you as an individual and for the whole organization. Well, if you're in a field like HR or you're a lawyer, this knowledge is basically your superpower. We're talking about real, practical skills, like being able to read and interpret the law correctly, advise companies on how to avoid legal risks, write fair contracts, and handle really complex audits. But it's not just for the experts. On a much bigger scale, this knowledge is what builds a genuinely healthy workplace for every single person. Yeah, it helps companies avoid lawsuits, but more than that, it creates a fair environment, it protects everyone's rights, and it makes sure the business is operating ethically. You know, there's a line in our source material that just nails it. It says it's about protecting employee rights whilst aligning with organizational goals. That perfectly captures the balance, right? It shows this isn't about workers versus the company. Knowing labor law is about finding that sweet spot where protecting people actually helps the whole organization win. Okay, before we finish up, there's one last super important point I have to make. This rulebook we've been talking about, it's not finished. Not even close. It's a living, breathing thing that's constantly changing as our world changes. And wow, here is a perfect example. A huge change recently happened in India. They took 29 separate central laws and boiled them all down into just 4 new codes. That is a massive shift, and the whole point is to simplify and modernize the entire system. And here they are, the 4 new codes. You can probably see the pattern, right? They line up almost perfectly with those pillars we talked about earlier: wages, safety, industrial relations, and social security. It's a total reset of the legal landscape. And that really brings us to the main point here, because the laws are always changing with updates like these, and because courts are always making new rulings, you can't just learn this stuff once. Knowing labor law means you have to be learning all the time, just to keep up. So that brings us full circle. Your workplace has an official rule book, and it's written into law. And the only question left to ask is one for you to think about. Do you really know your rights and responsibilities? It's a pretty important question. Thanks for tuning in.